So in this video, I just want to walk you through some of the updates to V6, kind of list some of the new features, give you a very quick overview of them before we break each down one by one and really dive in much more into the functionality of each new feature. We sort of had a quick glance at the new look of Soundminer, but let's talk a little bit about what's new behind the hood. Things that you might not notice from the look of it have changed or have been greatly improved upon. So the first thing to note is this. Soundminer V6 is now a consolidated platform between Windows and Mac. So the functionality is the same, the look is the same. It's written on one unified code base so that if you move between Windows and PC, it should look exactly the same, at least the top level tier, which is what we're going to be talking about here. What used to be called V5 Pro. On the Mac, I think it will be called V6 Pro. I don't know what it'll be called on Windows, but basically the top tier of Windows and the top tier of Mac are going to function basically now identically, which is very nice. And they're going to look identical as well. This version has been completely rewritten to use Apple Silicon, so it's very fast on Mac. It also has GPU rendering for a big speed up improvement in graphics performance, so it's using Metal and OpenGL for graphic acceleration. And you're going to see some serious speed improvements overall, but in particular you should notice certainly things like scrolling and zooming. Anything graphical is just much more fluid and very, very smooth now. Scanning of records, I've noticed in some tests that I've done that with the exact same drives and the drive speeds and the amount of records, that scanning is about twice as fast as it was in V5 Pro. So when you're scanning tens of thousands of records, it was fast already, now it's even faster. As I said, zooming and resizing, things that take part of the graphics processor are noticeably faster. If you're in a network environment and using MySQL, you should notice noticeably faster performance when caching databases, when connecting to databases, like server databases remotely, when in like a work from home situation. There have been a lot of improvements for network users. Something called anticipative load, so Soundminer will become more responsive quicker, sounds cached into RAM faster. Simply clicking around on records is faster than it was before. Scrolling up and down with the arrow keys, pretty much everything in Soundminer will just feel faster. And overall a much better experience for network users. There are some improvements to ProxyMaker. We'll have a look at these. If you use ProxyMaker, and we're using it a lot now at Skywalker, it's a pretty powerful tool. ProxyMaker can now generate OGG files, which can be used for auditioning, especially over a network environment. This allows you to audition the sound with a lower quality, but much, much smaller file. So in situations where you have to access a database remotely over an HTTP server or something like that, this really speeds things up a lot. And the ProxyMaker now generates spectral files and waveform files. It pre-builds them. So again, in a network environment, this will just simply speed up the interaction of people connecting to your databases over a network. Again, this is something that's available if you want to sort of use it, and we'll talk a little bit about it at some point. And obviously, there are a lot of new features. Some of you probably know them already. You might have seen some of Justin's videos or heard people talking about them. So I'll just give you a quick overview. We have tabbed browsing, which is going to be a huge one and going to change how you interact with the program. We have reverse. There are new field options for deciding what fields you want to view. Much more intuitive, much faster in sort of making a view set. There are new search options. There's X-ray colored waveforms, which are fun. There's a new global effects rack on the main browser, which we'll look at in depth. There's a lot of color options now. You can really customize almost every color for Soundminer. There are new monitoring functions. So Rewire is dead, so we're going to replace Rewire. But also there's new fold down options for listening to multi-channel sound files in a stereo environment, for example, purely for monitoring. Before you'd have to sort of change the sound file to fold down to stereo using something like Spanner, for example. Now there are various new options for that, including a new fold down plugin, which we'll talk about. Again, Rewire is dead, so there's a new plugin directly built for Pro Tools to replace it. Every key command in Soundminer is pretty much customizable. This is a huge one for people who want to use things like Metagrid or Keyboard Maestro. It really simplifies your interaction with those programs. Automatic rescan, which is really cool. Basically, if you open up a sound file in a program such as Twisted Waves or RX and you make a change to it, a destructive change, when you switch back to Soundminer, Soundminer is now smart enough to recognize that the file has changed behind its back and ask you if you want to re-embed the metadata. The left and the right panel have some new features that we'll look at, some new features for the spotting panel, for the metadata panel, for the artwork panel, the filter browser. All of these things have been updated in certain ways, and we'll look at all those. There's a new mini tools menu directly accessible from the main browser. That's a quick way to get at some of the most custom things that people want to change. And there's a new fold down plugin for the DSP rack that handles multi-channel to stereo fold down in a really clever way. And we'll look at that. So real quick, I'm just going to give you a sort of walkthrough of some of those things. Now, the first thing we'll notice here are tabs. Now, tabs is something that's been talked about for years, and it was quite a difficult thing to pull off, I know, from talking to Justin a lot while he was working on it. But tabs enable you to have multiple databases open at a time. So here I have basically database 1 in its own tab, database 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. These are my sort of working temporary databases. Here's TNFX, which is basically my whole big master database. And here's a database of some of my sound libraries here that I've built just for the use in these tutorials. So what this enables you to do is not only have a database open in each tab, but I can actually store different view sets in different tabs, and it will keep them independent. So for example, if I right click and say make a new tab, or let's say duplicate tab, I can now have two versions of the database tutorials, but in this one, maybe I want description to come first. And in this one, I'm going to go ahead and search for Yellowstone, for example. And I get some returns of some of my Yellowstone files. Now when I switch back to this tab, you'll see that it's retained the same look as it was before, and it's showing all of the records. When I go back to this one, I see just the searched records and this new view. So you can sort of think of a tab as a fully independent version of Soundminer in a way. I think originally some people thought tabs were going to be sort of like their own working spaces or things like that. Just think of this as a tab holds a database view. And again, you're not limited to one database in one tab. I could have 30 tabs all pointing to the same database with different search results, with different view layouts. There isn't really any limit. Basically now multiple databases can be open at the same time. I have as many databases as I want open, each of them in its own tab. And I can also switch this. If I want to switch this tab to become database 1, you'll see that the name of it here changes to become 1. So each tab isn't locked to a database, it can be switched as well. I can switch to this database, show some sounds here. Again, I can rearrange all the views, and each one is fully independent. I can't simply drag to move them, but I can right click and say move to the top, move to the bottom, which is basically far left and far right. I can move them left one or right one by right clicking. I can also close a tab. I can close other tabs. So if I just want to have this tab now, the tutorials one, I can say close other tabs. And basically all the tabs disappear because I only have one. I can always add a new tab if I want. And once I have a layout that I want, I can store that layout under this layout menu here. I can say save the tab state. Now, when we look at tabs in much more depth, we'll look at all these other options here for how you restore the tab state, how you can search across them. You can have it auto-restore them on launch or manually or on a server connection. We'll go into depth on a lot more of that. But basically, this one is pretty huge. I can also rename them. I'll just show you that really quickly. So I could rename that, for example, with a search term if I wanted to. So that's tabs, and it's going to be a pretty big one. So I'm actually going to go to Layout and restore my tab state, which will get me back to exactly where I was, where I want to be for these tutorials. Now, another thing, as we mentioned, is that we have these new waveforms down here, these X-ray waveforms. This is an option. You can turn this on and off. If I go to my preferences and go to waveform, I can toggle them on and off, both the colored and the X-ray view. Now I have just the normal ones that follow the normal color scheme, or I can turn them on, the sort of colored view. Now the colored views sort of show different frequencies, and you can kind of see quite a bit of information about the frequency that way. And if I play a sound, you'll see that there are these new meters, as I mentioned. One is a frequency meter, which will show you sort of the spectral content across the frequencies, and one is a volume meter. And if I clicked on a multi-channel file, I don't think I have any in this database, this would expand out to as many channels as the file has. One thing that a lot of people will want to know about is that basically Soundminer now has its own ability to set its output device. So you're no longer locked to the system output. This is a huge one for a lot of us that want to be able to send Soundminer directly out a particular or an attached audio device. So from here, I can simply choose the output that I want for Soundminer to use. I can basically also choose which channels are active. So if I chose something like my Focusrite interface, which should be here, I can sort of tell it to use multiple outputs. So I can do surround directly from Soundminer without having to rely on Rewire or something like that. I can also set the sample rate independently of my system sample rate. This is a huge one, but I'm no longer locked to my system sample rate. So if my computer is locked to 48K, I can actually set Soundminer to 96K. One of the other things that's new is this little headphone drop down over here. And I'm sure it's getting cut off. So let me resize Soundminer over a little bit. Now we mentioned that Rewire is dead. There is a new plugin called the Soundminer Monitor, which will be available for download. This basically is an AAX plugin that you can run in Pro Tools, and it will connect to Soundminer behind the scenes, just like Rewire did, only much more stably. It also has some really cool new features. We'll look at that a little bit later, but this is how you would connect to it if it was running. Pro Tools isn't running right now, so it won't do anything, but if I hit connect, I just get a little message saying it's unable to connect because Pro Tools isn't running. But the other thing that I can do in this menu is that I can basically enable some fold downs. Now these are pretty cool. Before, as I said in the introduction video, if you wanted to monitor a surround channel, there were some different options of how Soundminer could handle it, and sometimes you'd have to put a fold down plugin. Well, now we have a monitoring only option to fold down certain things. So surround to stereo down mix, well, basically using the normal down mixing rules for 5.1 or 7.1, down mix everything into stereo. This is really useful if you're on a stereo only system, but you're having to monitor a bunch of surround files. In the past, Soundminer would just play you the left and the right by default. You wouldn't hear the center, you wouldn't hear the surrounds. But now you can fold down to mono, or you can fold surround down to stereo. Now along the bottom are some buttons that have been requested a bunch, and they're to toggle on and off some of the most useful things that people tend to change a lot. For example, spot as region can be toggled off and on directly from here. Reference original, interleaved audio, and intelligent transfers can be toggled right from down below. And right now, since we're here, I'll show you this. This is the mini tools icon. When I click on this, I can get at those same options. You can also turn on autoplay and strip silence, which I usually leave off and on respectively. I can set an audition fade in and a transfer fade in, which I leave at the 0.10 milliseconds. That's fine, or 0.10 seconds, I should say. And if Pro Tools running, I'd be able to sync the Pro Tools Soundminer transports. Now, this was a function of rewire that's been lost, so Justin has figured out a way to sort of link them, and we'll look at that again later. If I have a quick look at the right panel, we'll see that the metadata panel is pretty much as you probably remember it. I think there's a few changes here when we go into it in more depth. Summary is basically as it was. The artwork has some new views, so we have a library view and a show view, and we're going to look at those. But library view basically shows you all the artwork for each library and the number of records, and show would show you by using the show field. One new trick is that the spotting panel can be popped out. So I can click here and say pop out the spotting panel, and it can float. So at one point the spotting panel always floated. At one point the spotting panel always docked. Now you have your choice. If I simply close it, it redocks itself. And the metadata panel basically can also pop out. So I can pop that out as well. Now we'll look at this more in depth. The metadata panel is sort of the best replacement at this point for the old admin window, the Command I window, which is gone forever now in this version of Soundminer. So we'll look at that more in depth, but this is the best way to edit metadata if you're used to the Apple I admin window from the past. Transfer history is still there. And the left panel has a few changes. The linked filter now has 4 basically slots instead of 3, so you can sort of sort by up to 4 things in the left panel. Saved searches and playlists are basically still functionally the same. Now one thing that's new are sort of the ability to lock the search pills. So if I do a search for, let's do again Yellowstone, you'll see that I get a search that says term Yellowstone. Now one thing that I can do is right click and I can say that this is locked. Now no matter what else that I do, this term will always apply. So if I do a show all, for example, I only seeing the 223 returned searches because this is basically locked. This is always going to apply. So one other neat trick for the pills is that you have the ability to exclude certain things. So we open up the left panel and let me pull up the category aircraft. I now get a pill that says category equals aircraft. Now when I right click on that, I can exclude this. Now you can't exclude any normal search term, but you can exclude anything I believe from the left panel. So any field type result can be excluded. Now if I also lock this, I've said basically never show me the category aircraft. Well, let me hide the left panel and actually search for aircraft and see what happens. You'll see they only get 1 record, and that's not in the category aircraft. Now, if I bypass this and I search for aircraft, you'll see that I show a bunch of records that have the category aircraft. The advanced find window has been updated a bit. It's got a little bit of a new look. You can actually also drag it out. You can now add multiple terms in the advanced find, and you can also see that basically regex is now available in the advanced find as well. Things like does not contain, starts with, is empty. There's a lot of new functionality here in the advanced find, which really allows you to narrow in on something. So I can say if the cat ID is empty, if the description starts with this, if the effects name matches this regex phrase, I can do all of that in search all at once. The find in field is a little bit different as well. It's now a floating window that tends to stay up. It used to disappear every time you would click onto a new field. Now if I click over here, for example, in category full, you'll see that I'm searching find in field in category full. So if I search jet, there it is, I show my jets right there. If I now click over on description, it's now basically switching over to find in field in description. Now it hasn't run yet. Just by clicking on something doesn't necessarily run it, but I can hit OK, and there it searches now find in field for Yellowstone. So the find in field window, which is very useful now, just floats and it stays up basically as long as you want it to. Now one thing you'll see here is the new global effects rack, which we're going to look at more, but basically You have all the same effects that you had before in Radium are now available here. So if I wanted to turn on the bass enhancer, so we have the same ability to perform a bunch of effects work right here in the main browser without having to open the DSP rack. The DSP rack is fairly unchanged, but one thing to note is that the DSP rack can now use VST3 plugins. If I call up the plugin and go to Soundminer, you'll see that there's now this new fold down plugin. And basically within this plugin, I can pan, I can adjust levels independently on each channel. I can flip the phase on each channel. I can also basically do some MS decoding by specifying one being a side channel, for example. And I think this is a high pass. HP must be a high pass filter. I also have over on the right side here a correlation meter. I can see whether the sound is in phase or not. There are some things like auto load, auto bypass, and save to database that we'll look more in detail when we look at the auto fold down plugin. Have another look in the preferences really quickly to see that there are basically now a lot of color options. You can get at most everything here, including the waveform colors, the text colors, the backgrounds of various panels, and you can really customize the look. There are some built-in presets. This is sort of Justin's default for V6. This is a preset that I made, which is called O&D Gray, which is basically a homage to my favorite show of the year, Severance. But you can basically save and export your colors as you could before. And there's a bunch of new options here. Red Scorpion is a new one that Justin did. And I'm going to include probably a couple of more that are just some options as well. But you can basically colorize anything in Soundminer that you want now. I mentioned the new fields options, which is really cool. That's now been added up here to the main tab. And what's really cool is that you can click on it. And from here, for the first time, I can simply drag the order around of the fields that I'm viewing. I can check and uncheck fields directly from here. And one neat trick is that if I simply start typing the name of a field, for example, let's say I want to add era, I can start typing era, and you'll see that little nice arrow pops up, and I can simply hit the space bar to toggle that one on. Let's say I want to add index next. I can add that one really quickly. So from this little pop-up, you can really quickly change the view of what you're looking at. And of course, I can still drag them around manually, but I can also now drag them around from here. I mentioned that there's reverse, so I can quickly click this, and I'm now reversing the file, so becomes this. It's smart enough to know that if I have a selection and I reverse it, it'll keep the selection. If I've defined some Radium regions, it will also basically keep those in the correct place. So reverse, as simple as it is going to be a huge one for a lot of us that want to do this all the time. Now, a huge one, as I mentioned in the sort of introduction, is that you can now change basically all of the key commands. So I'm going to call up the key command window, and I'm just going to scroll down and show you that you can basically get at almost every single thing here in Soundminer and assign it a custom key command. Now, these are all the ones that I've used. I'm going to actually include this file. There's a way to basically share these if you wanted to. For people who are interested in Metagrid, which we'll do a whole video about, as I did in the first set of tutorials, I've upgraded a lot of that for V6. I'll include that along with all my Keyboard Maestro macros, which rely on a lot of these custom key commands that I've sort of just set in here to be unique. So that's a quick look at all of the main new features. There are a bunch more that will get covered, I'm sure, in the rest of the videos, but I just wanted to give you a quick overview of the newest, most obvious features in Soundminer V6 that you're going to likely interact with a lot. Again, in the next set of videos, we'll really start to dive into each of those functions. We'll really look at tabs in depth. We'll look at the new pill functions, locking and all that. We'll look at the left and the right filter panels. We'll look at the new pill functions, advanced find. We'll look at the fold down options in the fold down plugin. We'll look at the Soundminer monitor, which is something we've just kind of hinted at here, but we'll fire up Pro Tools and look at that along with Pro Tools Sync. We'll look a little more at the key commands and how you can back that file up, how you could share it with other people. We'll look at a few things that I didn't bring up here, but there are some new blocks in workflows that really enable some new powerful functions. The ability to run a workflow preset directly from the workflow window, which we'll go into as well. And we'll show some examples of the rescan mode with RX and with things like Twisted Wave. We'll talk about Global Effects Rack presets, which is something that's new. You can basically make and save presets. You can actually organize them into folders. We'll talk about that more when we look at that. There is actually a new Exciter plugin as well that I didn't mention, but we'll look at that when we look at the effects rack. There's sort of one new addition to the effects rack. There are some new models to the saturation and the distortion, so you now have some choices in the different models that are used, and they definitely can affect the sound quality in different ways. So I think that's it for a really quick overview of Soundminer. Now, later we'll look at Radium and start to look in all of the new features in Radium, but this was just a quick overview of the main new features here in Soundminer. Again, some of them like tabs, we're going to get a much longer video going into depth. This is going to be the function that's going to change how you interact with the program more than almost anything. But we'll start going through all of these new features starting in the next set of videos.